Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Laravel News Podcast. This is episode 168. I am Jake Bennett, and again with me, as always, Mr. Michael Dorinda. Michael Dorinda.
Hello. I'm in my
Got that Champions hat on.
it's that time of year. Where is it? Over here. You can
Yep, got that
see.
Laravel News Podcast hoodie,
Got the
no,
Laravel
not
News
podcast.
swag on. That's it.
Laravel News
Yes,
swag on.
it's
Yes.
like I can't tell if it's hot or cold. Like yesterday, it was. We had 4 seasons yesterday. It was cold. It was sunny. It was raining. It was just the whole thing. So it's
The whole deal.
It's hard to keep tabs on, but today it's cold, I'm pretty sure. So in the jumper, I've got the Champions hat on because this is all I have at the moment. My Lakers are long gone from the finals. The Phoenix Suns, poor Paul Redmond, didn't even. I keep ribbing him because he's a Suns fan, and
of course he's from the Phoenix area there, Scottsdale area ish.
Yeah, so I said to him last off season when Chris Paul didn't take the team option, that the Suns should have just got rid of him because he's too old and he's just got this entire career of never winning a championship. And that instead of doing that, they re-signed him to like a $40 million contract. And yeah, it's they could have gone and got someone else. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But the Golden State Warriors and the Eastern Conference, they're going to Game 7. So interesting to see how that goes.
I haven't been watching any of that mostly. But I'm glad that I don't know what I was going to say there. I'm glad that you're enjoying it. I'm not sure what I was going to say. I don't know.
I haven't. I watched. Look, I'll be honest. I watched the game 7. I think the Dallas Phoenix series just to watch Dallas beat the Suns because I'm a bitter Lakers fan and I'm like I don't want the Suns to win. So. But that's the only finals I've watched. The Lakers played their last game, and that was the end of the NBA season for me. I don't care who wins or loses. I mean, I hope it's not. As a Lakers fan, I hope it's not Boston, just because then they'll get one up on the Lakers again. But good to see.
But hey, you never
Golden
know.
State back up there.
Indeed.
Anyway, let's do this. Let's say hello to.
Let's do it.
Hello. Let's say thanks.
Yes, absolutely. Why don't we? Thanks to our friends Honey Badger. Who are longtime sponsors, repeated sponsors for sponsoring the show. Honey Badger, of course, is error tracking for your apps because even the best developers have errors, lots of them, most likely. And then secondly, we have Scout APM, which is application performance monitoring. So it sits on your servers. It watches all your stuff to make sure that everything's behaving correctly. So we have a double sponsorship this episode. We're going to be talking about both of those sponsors a little bit later in the show. But until then, on we go. Laravel 9.13 has been released. Let's talk a little bit about that. Let me get it pulled up here because my computer is going slow. Here it is, 9.13. All right, of course, you can see all the notes and new features updates below and the diff between 9.12 and 9.13 on GitHub. Here are some of the highlights. So we have add value collection method. Steve Bauman contributed a value method to the collection class, which gets a single keys value from the first matching item in the collection. So in this case, you would say find collection where ID is 2, value, name. So grab the value of just that one particular item from the first matching item in the collection. So this would be like if you ever had where you call you might have something that could have a set of values that are returned, but you just want to get the first one, right? Mm-hmm. So you call get and then you call first and then you call value. Well, this you don't have to call first. If you're gonna if the collection is still returning a set of values and you call value on it, it just returns that one from that first item in the collection.
First item in that, and that whether that's the collection in whole or if it's a filtered subset of that collection, I guess it's synonymous with the same method name on Eloquent. So you can do like user : where whatever arrow value, and then that'll get you the just the value. So it'll select just that value and return that without having to do like first arrow property, whatever.
Yeah, I did not even know that it was a thing. So That's funny that they're adding it to collection and I'm just learning about it for the Eloquent stuff. So there you go. All right, we also have Danilo Poliano.
Polani.
Polani, sorry, Danilo Polani, contributing a assert JSON missing path method to the test response class. So there's a couple examples here. So you could assert that JSON is missing path email. So that would say never return the user email, for example, or assert JSON missing path. And you can do this dot separated sort of data dot zero dot internal tags. So you can kind of burrow your way through the result there and make sure that there's nothing in that spot. It should be missing that location. Also, we have Chris Anthos contributing an assert count method to the notification fake class. So the use case for this method is asserting that a given number of notifications were sent in a test. So if you're getting your test set up and you call notification fake and you just want to assert that there was 4 different notifications sent, you just say a notification assert count 4. Nice, easy way to do that. We also have a test response collect method. Ilya Borisov contributed this collect method to the test response class. This will get the JSON decoded body of the response as a collection for you. So you can get the whole test response as a collection by just calling response arrow collect, and then that will give it to you in a collection rather than just giving you the JSON values. So nice. There you go. Daniel Eckerman contributed an array map method, or ARR, or array helper map method. So the example that they give here is they have an array that has the first key is first with the name of Taylor. The second key is last with the name of Otwell. And in this case, what you can do is you can array map, passing in those values and keys, and you could say return key dash, interesting. I guess this is just giving you the key and the value. I'm not sure exactly what the difference is here from what we would normally have. I guess I'm thinking collection map. Maybe there is no array map.
So
if I was going to use this,
this is
I would typically just use the native.
Map. Yeah, so this is just exposing the array map function via the array class or the ARR class. Yep.
Yeah, so if you don't want to use the PHP version of it and you'd rather use the ARR version of it because you want to, I suppose you now have the ability to do that. Thank you, Daniel Eckerman. Of course, as we said at the top of this one, you can see all the change log stuff and all the diffs on GitHub. Thank you, Paul Redmond, for putting that one together. That's 913. 914, my friend.
Just on that, it's nice to get symmetry between the native PHP functions into that array class. Sure. I mean, there's been things in there that I've wanted to do recently where, I've had to use, and like it's not a bad thing, obviously, having to use the native PHP functions. It's just nice for that symmetry to have the native functions available in an object interface. Sometimes it can be a little bit nicer to work your way through application code in that manner.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. So, as you said, Laravel 9.14 was also released since the last time we spoke. And this one has some new migration table comments functionality, a dynamic trash factory state, a new array key helper, and some bootable setup test traits and more. So, first cab off the rank, I guess they say, Andrew Broberg contributed the ability to add table comments for MySQL and Postgres migrations. So, the schema builder or the migration functionality previously allowed you to add comments to table fields, whereas this is now specifying a comment on the table itself. This feature is useful for Andrew so that their business intelligence team can better understand the database schema. They already add comments on columns. Adding comments on the table is also beneficial in helping to describe what that table is used for. So, if you're in an organization, if you're an organization of a sufficient size, you may be tracking these things. The BI team is responsible for then going and doing analytics and getting metrics on your data. So having them be able to just look at a table comment, what is the data in this table representing, or having a look at a field comment to see, what is this field representing, whether, the names are not necessarily clear of the fields in the tables. This allows them to do that without having to necessarily interact directly with the, the development teams and things like that. So it's useful to do that kind of stuff rather than having to dip into the, raw statements and things like that. Next up, Jason McCreary, or JMac, contributed dynamic support of a trashed factory state for models using soft delete. So you can, rather than having to do, factory create and then passing in a deleted at value, you can now say model, : factory, arrow trashed, arrow create, and that'll handle that for you, setting a deleted that flag on that model automatically
Nice.
as
Yeah,
a
that's nice.
date in the past. So definitely check that one out. David Hermans contributed a new array helper to prepend all key names in an associative array quickly. So this is array : prepends keys with, and you pass it obviously your array, and then you can, as the second parameter, say I want to prefix it with whatever, so prefix dot, and that will go through and map each of the keys in that array with that prefix value. Pascal Baujet contributed a bootable trait feature from Eloquent to the base test case class. There's also another pull request number 39,883 that has prior art related to this feature. This feature works by using a trait on a test case that has a method prefix with setup combined with the trait's name. So in a similar way to where we have boot trait, you can do like if you have a, say for refresh database, the refresh database trait will have a boot refresh database method. So this is allowing you to, on a trait, create a setup method, right? So you've got a trait called refresh some service. You can create a public function set up refresh some service and then carry out some functionality there. So that's useful in your test situations where you need to initialize the state of that trait for your testing. So definitely check that one out if that's something that you have needed in the past. The feature, here we go. The feature could be useful to set up external services that you'll need throughout your test suite in multiple test cases. So definitely check out the pull request for that. We'll have links to that and everything else in the show notes.
Very nice. We're going to move on to news here. And in the news, we have got Tinkerwell 3, which is your PHP code runner by the team at Beyond Code. So Tinkerwell has been around for a while. If you haven't heard about it before, basically this is a code runner for Laravel. So think PHP Artisan Tinker on steroids. So you can run any PHP code. You can use any feature of the latest Laravel versions. You can run code within your applications locally. So you can point it at a folder on your machine, or you can set up your SSH connections so you can run it in production. So you can just tinker around in production. You can do rapid prototyping, debugging. You don't have to set up like a test route in order to do something or throw something into a console.php. You don't have to do that. You can just run it straight into Tinkerwell. So it's really, really nice. I use it all the time. And I've been using version 3 actually for the last little while, and I'm really enjoying it. So some of the things that are new to it are intelligent code complete. Well, first of all, the UI just looks much better. It feels a lot nicer.
It's a lot polished.
Yeah, exactly. It does. It feels like a regular like 1.0 really. I don't know. That's not to sound insulting. Some of the other ones, I don't know. Some of the pieces just seem like they have a little bit of rough edges on them, but this really does seem super polished and really, really well done. So one of the things that's really nice is it comes with this excellent code completion experience out of the box. So this is something that if you're using an editor that you've spent any time with, you've likely got some of this set up already. But code completion is just something we sort of take for granted, and it was something you would really feel when you were in Tinkerwell before. Not having that was like, where is it? And so now that is included. It indexes your code base and provides instant auto completion, even when you're connecting to remote projects via SSH. So it will go ahead and autocomplete classes, methods, constants, whatever you want to do there. That's kind of nice. It's also got this interesting these magic comments. So you can use a special comment syntax, which you can use to quickly dump out variables or perform method calls in the middle of a method chain. Even measure the time of your code execution. So they have these little special snippets that you can put in order to dump out some of that stuff to the sidebar when you run it. So I'm not going to go through what exactly those are because I haven't learned what they are yet, but they are there. You have an improved, let's see, automatic code coverage adds colored indicators next to your code that will tell you exactly which line of code was executed and which one wasn't. So if you have an error in your code, that error message will be shown directly next to the code that produced it. So that's pretty cool. As we talked about, a beautiful new user interface, which is really nice. Dark mode, light mode, all of that stuff. It also has improved Docker and WSL support, which I think Windows is or is WSL is Windows Subsystem Linux or something like
Yeah,
that. Is that
subsystem
what it
for
is?
Linux. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. WSL. Yeah, so Tinkerwell 3 is a free update for everyone who has an active Tinkerwell license that qualifies for updates. That would be me. That's what I got. They also have, I think, for a very limited period of time right now, a lifetime license for Tinkerwell 3. Typically, if you buy Tinkerwell, you will get a year worth of updates, and I think it's like $60 to renew. But you can get a lifetime license for I think $200. So if you're interested in supporting those authors
I think
and you
that's
want to get
finished now.
updates for, is it okay?
Mm.
Well, too late then, folks. Sorry you missed it if you didn't get it. So, um,
If you're
anyway,
watching
there
live,
you
I'm
have it.
sorry. If you're
Yes.
listening, you won't ever hear this at all.
Okay. Well, just leave it in there because a little bit of color here. All right, Michael, over to you, my friend.
All right. We mentioned at the top of the show, we've got Scout APM back. Now, Scout APM is application performance monitoring designed to help PHP developers quickly find and fix performance issues without having to deal with the headache or overhead of enterprise platform feature bloat. With a developer-centric UI and tracing logic that ties bottlenecks to source code, Scout helps you quickly pinpoint and resolve performance abnormalities like N+1 queries, slow database queries, and memory bloat. So you can spend less time debugging and more time building. And with Scout's real-time alerting and weekly digest emails, you can rest easier knowing that Scout's on watch to help you resolve performance issues before your customers ever see them. You can give Scout a try with a free 14-day trial and experience firsthand why PHP developers worldwide called Scout their best friend. And for Laravel News listeners, Scout will donate $5 to the open source project of your choice when you deploy. You can learn more at scoutapm.com/news. Thanks,
Excellent.
Scout.
Thank you, Scout. All right, on to packages here. We've got first up the simple wallet implementation for Laravel. So Stephen Jude Stefan Jude created the simple wallet implementation for Laravel models. So let me talk about how it works and then give some examples for where you might use this. So in order to use this, all you do is you add this use has wallet trait to whatever model you care to add it to. This allows you to make deposits, withdrawals, and then check the balance of the wallet for a given model. Given a wallet balance from the examples that are given here, you can make withdrawals. And if you attempt to withdraw more than the amount in the wallet, the package throws an exception. So it is a simple wallet implementation. And I was trying to think through like, okay, how would I use this? I could think of a couple ways. If you've ever heard of Envato or really a lot of these products that allow you to purchase in advance, like a set of credits that you could have. So you say like you pay $20 and you get 20 credits, for example, right? This wallet implementation would give you the ability to do something like that. I could even see having like an employee rewards program where maybe if they get like a shout out from somebody or whatever, maybe they get so many points in their wallet to spend towards company swag, or maybe that's exactly what it is you have maybe an external vendor and you guys have a swag program where external vendors, if they use X number of dollars for your product, they get points towards your swag store. Who knows? There's a bunch of different ways that you could use this, but being able to make deposits and deductions and not having to think about how that works and having a tested class in order to or a tested little package that gives you the ability to do that, I can see being pretty nice. So check that out. Stefan Jude, Laravel Wallet.
Very nice. And next up, we have from Joseph Silber, releasing Bouncer, which is a roles and permissions package for Laravel apps.
It's so funny. He's releasing it after 1.3 million downloads.
Right. he's finally tagged a 1.0 version. It has been extremely reliable and stable for quite a while now, and is being used in production by countless apps worldwide. I remember 2016, I think, is the first time that I came across Bouncer and used it in an application. So it's
I've been using it too.
It's been around for a long, long time. This is a personal update from Joseph with some personal musings about the journey through the years from inception to final release. And there's also some technical information on how to use Bouncer day to day. You can check out that documentation. And he even did an episode of the Laravel podcast with Matt Stauffer. We'll include links to that in the show notes. So Bouncer is an open source package for dynamically managing roles and permissions in the database that is fully integrated with Laravel's gate facade. So why you might use this over just using the gates themselves, you can configure and manage all of these permissions within the database. So with the facades and the policies and things like that, that's all done in code. And it doesn't allow you to sort of dynamically manage that functionality for your application users as easily. So this gives you simple abilities to allow users access to certain features. You've got model abilities that apply to obviously eloquent models, the ability to use flexible roles. You've got forbidding abilities, ownership of models, multi-tenancy, and built-in caching, and a whole lot more, which we'll have links to in the show notes. So this idea actually came around for Joseph back in 2015 after the authorization system was added to Laravel 5.2. And this provided a nice API for defining permission checks in your app for various actions through simple defined callbacks, as well as full on policies and hooks throughout the system for checking permissions. So we've got the blade directives, we've got user can, user cannot, all of that kind of stuff. You've got the authorization or the authorized methods in controllers and so on. As soon as Joseph started playing with this, he knew that the future of ACL for all Laravel apps would be rooted in this, and it's just that good in terms of comprehensive functionality. And Taylor really does have this amazing sense for clear and intuitive APIs, and the gate abstraction brought that to light. But the one thing that was missing from the built-in authorization system was dynamic permissions that are stored in the database. And as I said before, the way that the gate is built, all checks are performed by hard-coded functions defined in your application, so there's no way to allow admins of your app to control any of that at runtime via some dashboard UI. This gives you the structure to organize logic, the authorized actions in entities. It does not make any determination on how your user roles are stored, and that's where Bouncer came in and how Joseph kind of went about this. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail, but he talks a bit about the name and the logo and where all that came from and some of the inspiration behind it and where it ended up now with the current version, as well as some of the technical underpinnings and things like that. So we'll have documentation links and all of that for you in the show notes. But it's testament to the work of Joseph and the contributors to the package that we're finally at a 1.0 release. It's kind of been a bit of a disservice by his own admission that it's been this long since he released it. Because it's been stable and it's been in use for applications everywhere for years and years. But some people and some organizations, they see a piece of software that it's at like version 0. Whatever, and they just and are about, it's not really ready. They might change it. And, Semver kind of makes people think that if it's a 0 release, you could have a breaking change at any time, which isn't necessarily the case. So it's good to see that that's finally out. And congrats to Joseph for putting it together. As I said, we'll have links to the story and all of that information for you in the show notes, as well as the podcast, the Laravel podcast that he did with Matt Stauffer.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking to see here. 1.4 million downloads, I think is what it says now.
Yeah.
So, no, sorry, 1.34. Yeah. So, I think the main defining characteristic here is that, yes, you can use gates and policies, and that will get you a really long way in Laravel. But as Joseph points out in this article, those are all hard-coded values. So if there ever needs to be an update to permissions, it must be made by a person who has access to the code. And that is not always preferable, right? So as your code, as your site, your app grows in complexity, sometimes it's nice to be able to offload that set of permission management tasks to an administrator of the application. And using this tool, you can now store those values in the database and update those dynamically, using the database, store them in there and update them in there. So we use Bouncer in one of our more complex applications where it's, specifically with permissions being a problem, and it's been a really great package. So awesome. We've also got another package here called Kinetic. This is a View Composer package for inertial. So what does that mean? So it adds View Composer-like features to Inertia.js Laravel adapter. So let me just talk about what View Composers are for a second. So View Composers are basically something where you have a view that you list. So you would say something like document.index. And anytime I load the document.index, I'm going to run this closure. And this closure is going to provide something to that front end view blade file, right? So maybe that document.index, I want to pass along to that document.index, I don't know, the number of stars that all the documents have. I mean, it's a stupid example, but maybe let's say that, okay? So you could say count stars and pass that as $stars. Now, when this actually becomes useful is when you say, well, there's actually a few different ones that I want to provide this value to. Maybe there's a component that lives on all these different pages, and I don't want to have to populate that in all of the different controllers that are going to be calling views that contain that component. So instead, I'm going to make this view composer, and all of these views that contain this little component that needs the number of stars, I'll just put them into this view composer and just pass along the $stars variable to all of those views. That's for me what a view composer is in my brain. So let's talk about this. Like Laravel view composers, Kinetic can bind data each time a component is rendered from a single location. So within a service provider, you call the composer method to define these inertia composers. So same deal, inertia : composer, and then you pass in the component, so user profile, and then you can call a class, so user composer class. And this takes a compose method and then allows you to return into that inertia component a set of values that then will get accepted as props, I'm guessing. So the composer method supports closure-based composers as well. So instead of passing it a class, you could also just pass a closure there and return those values. So with those composers defined in a service provider, your props will include the composing data when you call render. So exactly as I basically described it at the top, if you have a component that is loaded in a bunch of different places and you don't feel like passing those props down every single time, or you don't feel like the component having to make an additional call itself to get those values, because that's the other option, right? You could just say, put the component on the page, and then the component knows about this endpoint, this API endpoint that it goes and gets the stars from. So it doesn't matter where I put it, it just is going to call it when it loads itself up. Instead of doing that, this is another option, right? You could just always run this closure, provide that value from the back end to the front rather than from the front end requesting the back end and then getting a response. So it's an interesting idea. The only thing in the warning that I would say here is that if you don't have a convention that tells your development team that this is happening, it can be very freaking confusing trying to run down where these things are at. Like, where am I getting this data from? I have no idea where it's coming from. It's not in the controller. I don't see it anywhere. Where is this?
Yeah.
So you're going to need to hint to people, like when they're looking for it, where it's located, because it's not super obvious and it's not necessarily a convention I see used all that often.
Yeah. View composers
so that's
is
the only
one of
warning.
those things. Like it's almost like too much magic because it's not obvious. Kind of like event listeners. Firing events is good if you're giving people the ability to hook into different things in your application, or if you're sending off telemetry to, customer, like some of those mix panel, for example. If you're sending stuff away, it's good to kind of defer that stuff to the background. But if you're doing behavior that your application kind of relies on, view composers and events and those kind of things can be a little bit as you say, hard to track down, because view composers, they're not spoken about a lot. They're not really conventional in terms of a Laravel app, and so I would say
I've used them
sparingly
before,
and use them in caution. And like anytime I've ever used them, they've caused me problems, because when you come back to that code in like 3, 4, 5 months, you're like, hey, where does this variable
I literally
come from?
haven't thought about view composers in like probably 3 years. I mean, I haven't thought. So it's interesting though, like especially in something like inertia, because this problem does exist, right? Where it's like you have a component that needs to get something, and instead of having to make the component call to an endpoint and get it and then get it back, I mean, I get it. It makes sense why you would do it. And this is actually why something like Laravel components, like your blade components, it's really nice, because in your little Laravel component, it includes all of that stuff.
Yeah,
you can
and
do
obvious.
that, right?
Like where you render the component, you know that there's going to be like there's always going to be a view. Well, actually, that's not even true. There's not always going to be a view. There's always going to be either a view or a class, and there's only really two places to look. And it's obvious from your blade template where that will be. So
exactly.
So, look.
Anyway,
I'm not saying don't use them. I'm saying be cautious when you do use them, because they seem like a silver bullet, but they can be like not problematic to what you're doing, but just tricky to track down later on.
Indeed. Yeah, they can bite you. Okay, go for it.
Next up, how to validate your Laravel application's config. This is a package by Ash Allen. So we've spoken about some of his stuff on the podcast before in terms of some of the
Indeed.
great articles that he writes. So as your Laravel projects change and grow, it's likely that you add new config fields and onboard new team members to work alongside you. And especially for junior developers, setting up config and environment variables on your local on your local development environment for the first time for each project can sometimes, but not always, be quite confusing. And like you and I spoke about this before, that
Oh
I don't
yeah,
remember if it was
for
on
sure.
Laravel News or if it was on our other
North and
podcast.
south. Yeah.
Talking about having like a setup script that runs through
Mm-hmm.
and sets environment variables and creates databases and does all that kind of stuff when you're onboarding new people. But you can still sometimes find yourself scratching your head thinking, are you using the right API keys, the right URL for the environment variable set? What are the different values that this config field can be? And of course, these types of issues can be avoided with well-written and up-to-date documentation. But um, if the questions could be answered and enforced programmatically before running your app rather than by eye or waiting until your code fails during runtime. So this is where the Laravel config validator comes in. It's a package that Ash built with the aim of trying to solve these issues by providing the ability for developers to define rules that can be used to validate config fields, which allows you to validate your config fields using an artisan command so that you and other developers can be sure that not only do you have everything, but you've got it set up correctly. And so the main benefit of using this package is that it encourages code as documentation because you can update your config validation rules each time your config changes rather than updating a markdown file with your project's documentation that's hidden away, never looked at. Like so many times I've gone, where is this thing? And been pointed at the documentation and just like
Yeah.
never strikes me to even look there. Like,
Yep.
why would this be there?
Yeah.
But it's also the kind of thing like if it's not documented and you figure it out, but then you forget to go and write the documentation, you get busy, whatever, like all of those things can happen. So this allows you to write complex rules relatively easily. So if, for example, you had a config field that stored your Mailgun API keys, you could write a simple rule to make sure that the key is present and that it is a string. And you could take it one step further and write a rule that makes a HTTP request to the API to confirm that not only is the key there and a string, but that it is actually valid and can be used to make requests in your application. So there's an example here that talks about doing this using validation rules. Or a similar sort of construct as validation rules. So this is using a rule make MailChimp API key, which has an array of rules. So it's required, it's a string, and it must be a valid MailChimp key. And after you define the rule, the package provides a command php artisan config validate. And so that will go and it'll check, does the key exist? Is it set? And in that rule, you can also say, okay, let's go make an API request, like a ping pong request to the API to make sure that it replies. If it doesn't, it'll tell you what the errors are. You know, the value is there or it's not there, that it's a string or it's not a string, and that, you know, you need to be able to make the request out to the API. So it's a really comprehensive and robust in Ash's opinion, and certainly just me reading this article. You don't need to learn any new syntax. It's using all the validator functionality provided by Laravel, so you can use the same rules that you already want to use. And getting up and running with it is just a matter of, you know, as long as you've got Laravel 8 and PHP 8, installing a composer package, running the vendor publish command, and then defining your configuration validation rule sets. I won't go into it too much more than that because there's quite a bit to it, but it's I certainly have suffered because I change jobs every 5 minutes. I've certainly suffered the new application onboarding issue,
So true.
possibly more than many other people. But you know, it's got the ability to customize validation error messages to only run in specific environments. Like locally, you might not necessarily need to have a valid Mailchimp key, for example. You want to check that only in production. So there's functionality in there to run things based on environments. Running the config validation, like you could make the config validation part of your deployment step to make sure that everything is there, and then fail out, you know, of the deployment if it's not there. So definitely check that out. And you know, especially if you're like growing your team, or you've run into these issues that we talked about in terms of enforcement, or, you know, things that aren't there. Ash has put together a really good package, and you know, as I said at the top, we've spoken about a number of Ash's articles in the past, and he always does some really good things. And I just wanted to drop in here that he's got a book coming as well this summer called Battle Ready Laravel, and it's a guide to auditing, testing, fixing, and improving your Laravel applications. So
Nice.
definitely check that out. You can jump on the wait list to get a 25% discount code for the book. But this is talking about, you know, learning to use automated tools and manual methods to audit code bases to find any weaknesses and areas to improve. It's going to help you write tests to increase confidence in your stuff, learn how to reduce and hopefully remove any of your technical debt. And so it goes into auditing, using automating tools, manual auditing, finding weak spots, testing, fixing issues, improving existing code and things like that. So yeah,
I mean, it's really reasonable price too,
yeah,
right? Isn't it like $39?
$39. Yeah,
Yeah,
$39 with a 25% discount. So definitely check that out.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I'm always really impressed with the content that Ash puts out. And
Agreed.
if you
Yeah,
have been too, this is a good way to support him and the work that he's doing. So check that out. We have links to it in the show notes.
for sure. Thanks, Ash. Okay, we have another package which was it kind of blew up a little bit on this week of May 24th. And I'm just realizing now my battery's at 14%. I'm going to have to go grab a battery pack here, but that's okay. So I'm going to talk about this first. So this is test form requests in Laravel with request factories by worksum. So this is Luke Downing. And so I'm going to give you the quick context here. So if you've ever had to do a test where you have to send through a request to a controller, for example. If you're wanting the test validation for just a particular set of fields or something like that, the frustrating part can be that you have to fill in all of the fields that make the valid request for that controller every single time. So if you're really only wanting to test one particular thing, you still have to fill in the name, the email, the address, the zip code, the city, the state, the whatever it is, right? You have to fill in all that stuff, which can get really annoying. And so basically the approach that's taken here is we used to have this problem with models. Models used to have, you have to just do the same thing. You have to do model create, and then you'd have to pass in all the values that you needed in order to create a valid database record, and then you could do your test, right? So every time you had to arrange your test, it was really nasty, right? So instead, what Luke's doing here is he says, why don't we just do the same thing for these requests? So what you can do is you can now create something. Let's say that we were testing our sign-up flow. Instead of having to pass in the username, the name, the email, the password, the address, the city, the state, the zip, instead of having to do all of that, what you can do is you can make a new sign-up request fake. So you just make a sign-up request, call fake on it, and then what you can do is you can do your couple things that you want to do, where you can say this post sign up, and then define the values that you are interested in testing, knowing that that sign up request already has all of the values that are needed to make a valid request for this endpoint. So sign up request : fake. It fills in, says, hey, when I make a request, I'm going to make a request that matches whatever is in this sign up request. You fill in any additional details that you want to, and then go ahead and submit it, right? So this post, I'm going to post to /signup. And now in there, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass an array of values that I'm actually interested in testing, that I'm actually interested in looking at when I run my test. The sign up request fake takes care of all the rest of it. So it's a lot nicer, a lot easier. And of course, that's not where it stops at all. So it ships with a artisan command to generate the factories really easily. You just PHP artisan make request factory and then sign up request factory. Of course, your naming is going to be important here so that it knows that it's going to be going in as a sign up request factory, not as a sign up request, just like what you would do as a form request, right? Because that could be confusing if you didn't do it that way. All the factors are by default placed into the tests /request factories. And similar to how we have model factories, you just have a definition method that returns an array. This is where we define any attributes that we want to be present when we're faking a request. The recommendation here is that you really only include the minimum number of attributes needed to make a valid request. And then, similar to how you would do with model factories, you can then decorate that factory as required. So you can use faker inside here to create randomized data rather than hard coding values. And then, interestingly, I thought this was kind of cool too. What you can also do is a lot of times, if you in your controller are using a form request to handle your validation of a particular set of data. So in your controller, let's say you have a store method, and then you say user sign up request or something like that. user sign up request store, whatever you'd want to call it, right? And then $request. What that will do then is it will resolve that out of the container, and then it will look at the rules array that is in your sign up request store, whatever, and then it will check against those first before allowing it to pass through to the rest of your controller. If you're doing that, if you're using form requests, you can now use this optional trait for has factory on that request, and then you can just in your test call that sign up request store fake, and it will just use that rule set that's in there to go ahead and generate that request for you, which is pretty freaking interesting. Yeah. It's cool. He says it's cool, although perhaps divisive, right? Some people might not like it. So it's optional, right? You don't have to do it, but it is an interesting way to do it. Then you obviously have the ability to add methods to your factory using just a with address method, perhaps, and it will just modify the state of that request. You also have other items like, let me see here one second. Okay. Yeah, you have other items like omitting fields from a request. So you could say sign up request factory without email, right? And you can say just take out that one particular one. You can use nested factories. So if you have a address request factory, and then you have a mailing request factory, you could call one within the other. Basically, any of the things that you can do with model factories, you can do with these request factories. So it's interesting. It's really interesting. It seemed like a lot of people were on board with this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would check it out if I was you.
I think there's
pretty
a
interesting.
good chance.
I'm going to plug in. So go ahead, take it away. I'm going to plug in real quick.
I think there's a good chance that this finds its way into core at some point in the future. It's one of those things that certainly, because it has the symmetry with the model factories, you just know how to use it if you know how to use model factories already. And I like that it kind of pushes to make sort of minimal changes to, or to providing the minimal set of data for your factory. And this is something that Joel Claremont tweeted about during the week as well, in terms of the benefits of minimal model factories in Laravel. And one thing that always hits me if I try and be too clever with my factories or try and get them to do too much, especially when you're defining related models in the factories, that it can end up giving you unexpected results when you're making tests that make assertions against things, because you're getting, extra models created and things like that. So definitely a wise approach, I think, to kind of keep things as minimal and as small as possible in that regard. And if you're not using model factories, and let's face it, sometimes your code is going to have errors, and even code that is written by amazing developers such as yourself. So when errors do happen, it's nice to know that Honeybadger has your back. Honeybadger makes you a DevOps hero by combining error, uptime, and check-in monitoring into a single, easy-to-use platform. Honeybadger will send you alerts in real time with all the context needed to see what's causing the error and where it's hiding, so you can quickly fix it and get on with your day. And the included uptime and cron monitoring also lets you know when your external services are having issues or your background jobs go missing or silently fail. You can go to honeybadger.io and discover how Star, Josh, and Ben created a 100% bootstrap monitoring solution, which is important because by being self-funded, it means they only answer to us as developers and not to venture capital overlords. So we can check them out. They're at honeybadger.io. Check them out for a very reasonable free tier. And thank you for sponsoring.
Whew, barely got it in time. Barely plugged it in time. I realized my MagSafe stuff I left at work on Thursday last week, or Thursday this week, and so yeah, oops, my bad.
That's all right.
Okay, I'm all plugged in now. All plugged in. Also, hey, quick shout out to this really cool app called Al Dente. So Al Dente is basically a battery monitoring solution. This is something that Mac sort of has built in, but it's not as good as kind of what I would want it to be. Apparently, the types of batteries that are being used now, they're best if they're not always at 100%. So I leave, my laptop is plugged in most of the day. When I'm at work, I'm almost always plugged in. And if I didn't have Al Dente, what would happen is my battery would constantly be at 100% and charging, right? It's just constantly sitting there at that 100% mark. And apparently, if you do that, eventually your battery life falls off a cliff. It just doesn't like that. And so what Al Dente does is Al Dente keeps your battery between 20% and 80% pretty much, right? it'll only let you charge up to 80 unless you tell it to top off, and then it will go ahead and boost it up to 100%. It'll let it charge up to 100%, but it basically stops it charging at 80%, so it's not constantly sitting there at 100. And then you can do sort of these um, calibrations where it'll do a 100% charge and then discharges to 15, then 100% charge, then it holds for an hour, then it discharges to 80%, and basically just doing a quick battery cycle sort of deal. So you can just kind of do that overnight. But I've really liked it, and I'm hoping, really my last MacBook, the only reason I was desperate to replace it is because my battery life was so bad. It was just so bad, and it was because it's plugged in 95% of its life and just sits at 100%. And so anyway, Al Dente, it's a good tool. I don't remember how much it is, but it's been worth every penny. Really like it.
Yeah,
so
I'm pretty sure
check
it's
it out.
just a open source thing you can pull down from
Is it really?
GitHub. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Maybe it is.
There's like
Maybe
a free
it is.
version, and then there's the pro version, which has heat protection, sailing mode, top up, calibration mode, all of those things. I think Al Dente is part of the setup. Is that right?
It may be. It may be actually. I pay. Yeah, I
Yeah,
pay
it is part of Al
for.
Dente Pro is part of setup.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think I just bought it once, lifetime purchase. Yeah, $22.
Mm-hmm.
Support indie authors, everybody. Support indie authors. It's worth it. Okay. Restructuring a Laravel controller using services, events, jobs, and actions. So we're onto the tutorials section here. And basically in this section, our job is not to go through the entire tutorial, but more to pique your interest with something that may be an item that you'd want to follow up on. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about what this is and why it might be useful for you. And this is from Pavilis, who is, I always forget the word.
Prolific.
Thank you. That's literally, it was just coming to me as I said that. He is prolific, a writer, video blogger, just a really big asset to the community. So thanks Pavelis for writing this. But basically here's the summary version of it, right? So one of the top questions you hear, especially from people who are just coming into a world where they're getting out of just doing CRUD stuff, right? They've been used to just doing CRUD. They have routes, they have controllers which talk to a model, and then you return that data to the front, and then it's like Livewire or Inertia, or it's just plain Vue, whatever it is, or Blade, whatever it is, right? But when you're getting out of that, where do you put all the rest of the stuff, right?
Yeah.
If it doesn't go in the controllers, where should we put it? The good news and the bad news is that with Laravel, there's no single correct answer to that. And I tell my junior devs this all the time, which they ask a question, I'm like, here's the thing. There is no right answer to this. There's like 5 right answers. You just have to pick the one that makes the most sense. And then like, here's kind of how I've done it in the past, or here's maybe our convention. Doesn't mean it's the only way, but it does mean this is how we've done it, right? So Laravel gives you the flexibility to choose the structure. You won't find any recommendations in the official Laravel docs. So there are a bunch of different options that have kind of cropped up over the last 5 years, I will say, as here is a really good way to do this, right? So there is some general refactoring that he talks about here. He talks about validation using form requests. He talks about using a service class. And he actually starts with a really concrete example here. So he says like, okay, I've got a controller method and it basically validates the incoming input. It creates a user. It uploads an avatar file. It logs the user in. It generates a voucher, and then it sends that voucher with an email, and then it notifies the administrators of the new email of the new user, which all sound like very reasonable things to do. But how do you break that down? What are the things you could do? Like where do you kind of tuck those pieces, right? So that's why he basically goes through the refactoring strategy that he's going to do here. So yeah, validation, a service class for creating the user, talks about single responsibility principle, maybe using actions instead of a service. So he goes through all the different things, right? So again, I'm not going to exhaust you by going through all of it, but I will say if this is something that if this is a question that you're asking yourself, where do I put all this code? If I'm not going to put it in the controller, where do I put it? This is a great article for you to read from somebody who has been doing this for a long time. So Pavilis, thanks for writing that one. I think that'll be really helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah, just on that, you're right. There is no one way, and like all of these can be right at the same time, depending on the size and scope of what your controller is doing. I think the key kind of takeaway is whether or not you're trying to abstract functionality away from your controllers, so that the functionality is actually going to be discrete, which then allows you, and this is where the actions are a really nice approach. It allows you to use that action in your controller, or it could be an artisan command if you want to
Yeah.
replay
Yep.
something, or it could be something that you dispatch as a job. This is something that I'm doing at the moment where I've got like this giant class, but we have possibilities where incoming payloads could fail for one reason or another, and it could be that we weren't handling something in a expected way, so we want to be able to replay that payload at a later date. So extracting all of that functionality into like an action pipeline or a class that handles that separately means that yeah, we can get the original payload coming through via HTTP via the API, but if it fails for whatever reason, or we need to replay it, then we can dispatch a job or call it from an artisan command and say,
Exactly.
go and replay this request kind of thing. So,
Yeah. Super nice.
and that's kind of where I tend to find the separation is, will I ever need to be able to do this set of functionality somewhere outside of the HTTP layer? And that's where I sort of start looking to pull things out. But, for very simple things, like especially if you're doing very small CRUD, I say very small, Laravel Vapor is like action classes all the way down from what I've heard. Fortify, Jetstream, all of that stuff is using action classes because it allows the core functionality to be called by initializing or by resolving, contracts from the container, and then having those concrete actions as part of your application. And that means that you can
it makes them easier to test too, by the way.
Makes it easier to test because it means you can test those individual pieces as well. You don't have
Correct.
to.
Yeah.
You don't have to generate. I mean, it's easier now that we've got these form request factories that Luke's put together. But it means you don't have to generate a giant payload to test every single piece of that start to finish. You can discretely test each of the steps, and that gives you more comprehensive coverage because it means that there might be a failure in one part of that. Well, instead of having to redo the whole thing and test the whole thing, you could just go and write a failing test for that specific action, and then fix that specific actions functionality up. And as I said, this is something that I'm like very much in the middle of at work at the moment to be able to do that kind of stuff. So
yeah, we were talking about it just before the show, pretty much.
there's so many ways to skin the proverbial cat.
Indeed.
Although there's like PETA-friendly. I'm sorry, I say proverbial cat, but there's PETA-friendly ways to say these things now. I don't. so many ways to dress a cat, I suppose.
Yeah, sure.
So,
there you go.
Yeah.
I don't know which is worse, skinny cat or dressing a cat.
Yeah, I'm not sure you should be dressing a cat. They probably don't like that very much either. But yeah, as
you
I
could
said,
call it field dressing a cat, which is the same thing as skinning a cat.
Right.
Did you know that?
Right.
Yeah. Gosh.
Yeah, I think
moving on.
It worse.
I am.
Yeah, so I think the long and short of it is as you said, and it's in the article. All of those things could be right depending on the context.
Sure.
And you might not care. Like you may never need to extract things in a way that you can reuse it elsewhere. So just leave it all in the controller and that's fine. But there's no right and wrong answer. Laravel gives you the tools to do whatever works for you. And if you're in a team, then do whatever works for you and your team.
Yeah. Indeed. Okay, I think we got one other item here.
Eloquent
one other item.
Performance. 4 examples of N+1 query problems. So this is an article by, again, Pavilis. And he's talking about where eloquent performance is typically the main reason for slow Laravel projects. And it's not that eloquent is slow, and it's not that Laravel is slow, and it's not that PHP is slow. It's that you're being very mean to your poor little database. So a big part of the performance issues that you can introduce via eloquent is the N+1 query problem. And in this particular article, Pavilis goes through what the N+1 query problem is, what a regular scenario for this would be. I suppose the main thing is if you wanted to say if you have a book model and you wanted to list a book with all of the authors, you might go select, or you would do book all, and then you'd iterate over that, and then for each book you might want to show the author. So you'd say book arrow author, and then show author name. And Laravel and Eloquent makes this very easy. The active record pattern makes this very easy. But the problem with that is that if you have 100 books, you've got one query to find all 100 books, and then you've got another 100 queries to get the author. So this is where eager loading is exceptionally useful, because you can say book with author get, and that will run 2 queries, one to find all of the books and one to find all of the corresponding authors. So this, this goes into using debug bar to find and fix these issues. Talks about using Laravel seeders to make sure that you're running tests, at least manual tests in your environment where you're seeding 10,000 records to make sure that you're not inadvertently introducing issues. Talks about what is this talking about? It says symbols. What? But what are the symbols?
It's talking about what is it talking about?
Two important symbols. Let's say that you have the same has many relationship between authors and books, and you need to list the author with a number of books for each type. Oh, so this is like, you could do like books arrow count, and that will run a query, or you can use author with count books. And that will give you like a books underscore count property automatically, and it's doing a nice fast query rather than selecting all of the books and then doing a count on the collection. So this is trying to avoid running queries that you don't need to. In most applications, the thing that is going to bottleneck you long before your code is like not performant, it's going to be the database. It's going to be running slow queries, inefficient queries, running hundreds of queries when you only need to run one or two queries. So, and there's ways around this. You can use the it was introduced, I think, in Laravel 8 or Laravel 9, the prevent lazy loading, which will throw exceptions in your development environment. Don't deploy that to production. You don't need to. A slow page is probably better for your users than a page that just throws a server error. Yeah, definitely check this one out. It goes into that a lot better than what I did just then. But Pavilis always puts together some really, really good content for Laravel News. So we appreciate the work that he does, not only for us, but also for the entire community.
Absolutely. People like Pavilis is why the Laravel community is the best place to be. Yep.
Agreed. Yep.
The best people. Hey, everyone. Quick sidebar. I was working on getting this little Power Wheels thing to work for my son for his birthday party today.
Yeah.
It's been sitting in our garage for 2 years, and I could not find a battery for it that would fit it.
No.
And so I decided to do the West Boss hackery, where you just buy a drill battery and throw it in there. And so I found these drill batteries on sale, and I was like, hey, perfect opportunity to try this thing. And so I got it working, and then I was like, awesome. And so then I wanted to make it even better, and then I fried it. Killed it. No. And so I was like, that was this morning. And like, my wife's like, oh, sweet. Like, you got it working yesterday. Like, is he going to be able to ride it today? I'm like, oh, actually, I killed it. So I had to take the whole thing apart. While taking it apart, realized there was a second motor that wasn't hooked up that I didn't even realize was in there. And it just was like the contact had fallen off. So I crimped it, reconnected it. So now it's got two motors. I'm like, freaking sweet. This is awesome. But it still's not working. So Jordan Brill comes over with a multimeter and is like, dude, let's figure this thing out. Because he's already done this before.
Yeah.
And so we're using this multimeter. Neither of us really know how a multimeter works. But we're like poking around on this thing. Jordan's like, this is the problem right here. This is what you need to do. Just wire nut these things together and you'll get it to work. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to try this. So he's like, all right, I got to go home. I'll see you in a couple hours, because they were coming over for the birthday party. Sure enough, got this thing working. Oh my gosh, bro, this thing hauls. It is so fast. I should send you a video. I mean, I can't even tell you. My little, 4-year-old, almost 5-year-old is whipping around the grass, going through our rock beds, running over bushes. Like, it's like a monster truck. And he, like, when he had his kindergarten graduation, he said he wanted to be a race car driver or a monster truck driver when he grows up. And I think all of his dreams came true today. It was so funny, dude. It is literally the fastest Power Wheels I've ever seen in my life. It was hilarious.
I mean, that's why these things have the batteries in them that they do, because they're kind of trying to limit the speed, and you put in a full-on battery, and it's all hell breaks loose.
It's supposed to be 12 volt. It's supposed to be 12 volt, and I threw 18 volt in there. So it's like 1.5 the power that it's supposed to have. And his face was just like, he was so happy. And so I did put a speed controller in there so I could turn it up or down. Like but the thing I had to bypass, the thing that I fried on it, that I actually had to bypass was the speed controller that it comes with. So I had to just like rip it out and just like wire nut the thing together. Like, hey, it's going straight to the motors, man. There is no like barrier to going as fast as you can.
When your son goes flying off this thing and crashes into the bushes, I don't want to hear any complaining.
It only took 5 minutes because he was taking people for rides, and somebody flew off the side of it while he was pulling a corner and went right into the grass. And then everybody was wearing helmets after that. Thankfully, nobody. Well, I want to say nobody got hurt. Somebody got run over as well. So
you're a menace.
I am a menace to society, but it was so fun. So anyway, if anybody's looking for tips on how to do it, ask me or ask Jordan Brill. I've got some links I can send you in an Amazon list that I could send you for the stuff that you need to make it happen. It's good times.
Let's wrap this up. We've got like 3 very small things to go.
What's that? Do we still have things to go?
Yeah, we've got some tutorials, some community links. Sorry, that you picked up.
Oh, no. I took them off. Those are from the last one.
Right.
Those are from the last episode. If you go look at episode 167, those are the same community links that you pulled from last time. They are gone now. There's nothing there. Otherwise, I would have been going to theirs. Sorry.
All right.
Sorry, buddy.
I wondered why you went on that little segue.
Yeah. Sorry, I was wrapping up the show. My bad. Sorry, man. Okay. Hey, everybody. This was episode 168. Find show notes for this episode at podcast.laravel-news.com/168. We would really appreciate it if you'd rate us up in your podcatcher of choice. We haven't had very many reviews lately. Come on, people. If you've been listening to this show for like more than a year, which you probably have, and you haven't given us a review yet, you know what? We would really love to have you review. Just spend just a couple minutes here. Just go review the show. I know it's complicated to do it because I can never figure out how to give reviews for shows either, but go take a minute and do it. That'd be awesome. Hit us up on Twitter at Michael Dorna, at Jacob Bennett, or at Laravel News. Until next time, folks, we will see ya.
Stay safe, everyone.
Bye.